Hi everyone. Thanks for coming to the final ECenter event of I2 Passport. We are lucky to have Joel Carstens here. He's the Director of Financial Aid. And we bring Joel to the ECenter every semester for a couple of reasons. One, student debt is a really important issue in this country. Two, it is known to be a barrier for entrepreneurship. So if you want to be an entrepreneur either now or after you graduate, it's harder to be an entrepreneur when you have the burden of student debt on you. And then lastly, the information that Joel's going to share with you and then the opportunity to have a Q&A is a valuable resource for you as you plan out how you approach your student debt after you graduate and even actually before you graduate. Mm-hmm. So please join me in thanking Joel for being here. Take it away, Joel.
Thanks, Heather. Sure. And thank you all for being here. This is actually a very big passion of mine to help students understand what student debt is and what it might mean for you for your future, because most students, both at the University of New Hampshire and nationally, have some kind of student debt that they incur while they're going to college. And so it does become something that you want to be able to manage, and you want to have the best information possible in order to do so. We have an aggressive agenda today with lots of content. Again, as Heather said, Joel Carstens, Director of Financial Aid. I've been at UNH for 5 years. I'm in my 5th year right now. But I have over 25 years of education financing experience at lots of different colleges and universities throughout the country. Again, aggressive agenda that we're going to talk about. I'm going to try and get through it as quickly as possible and as painlessly for all of you as possible as well, but leave lots of time for questions and answers, because what I find during these presentations is that students tend to have lots of questions that may not be universal to themselves, at least they don't think so, but actually are universal themes throughout the country. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about what do you need to do to get started in terms of managing student debt. We're going to talk about what you owe, understanding that first. Obviously, you can't plan for anything. You can't make a plan on what you're going to do, especially if you're going to be an entrepreneur, how to manage your student loans unless you know what you owe. We're going to talk about different options that you have for repaying your student loans. We're going to talk about how you define what your plan might be. We're going to talk about managing your repayment. And finally, setting yourself up for success. So, aggressive agenda. Let's start with getting started. What do you need to know and understand? You want to make sure that you understand and you know what you're going to be doing in the future. So whether you're going to be an entrepreneur or not, and you certainly don't have to be just because you're at the ECenter, whether you're going to be an entrepreneur or not, you have to understand what your career looks like and what your salaries are going to be in that career. Start taking some time now to understand what that's going to look like. Work with CAPS. Career and Professional Services here on campus. They're fantastic. They can get you lots of rich data on what your career is going to look like and what your career path might look like. Also consider how you want to live. Not just in that short period of time after you graduate, but what do you want your life to be like? How do you want that to progress? Understand what that lifestyle might mean and what budget may be associated with those lifestyle choices that you make. And also, and I know this is really hard, it's a lot easier for somebody like me who's closer to this point, but think about what kind of retirement do you want to have? Begin with the end in mind, right? So make sure that you understand how your choices now will impact what that retirement might look like as well. So understand and consider all of those different things. Also make sure that you understand what your expenses are going to be. Who here has a car payment? A couple people, all right? For those of you that don't, you're probably going to have one at some point in time in the future. What does that mean? Well, it means you have a different expense than you have right now, right? What other debt do you have? Credit cards. Try to avoid those as much as possible. I know you hear this from lots of different sources, but try to avoid that as much as you can while you're in college. There will be plenty of time, trust me, for you to acquire said credit card debt or other types of debt. Try to minimize that right now if you can. And then figure out what your goals are going to be. When you think about repaying your student loans, you have to figure out what your strategy is going to be, and we'll get into that in a little bit more later. But do you want low monthly payments, at least initially? Probably not a bad idea to think about that. But what's the incremental cost of that over time if you have the lowest monthly payment possible? Do you want to aggressively repay lower interest rate debt that you have first? Higher interest rate debt that you have first? How do you want to progress through? And for student loans, do you want to have all of your loans in one place? Is that important to you? I would argue that for most people it's not. It may sound like it will be easier for you, but oftentimes when you do that, it tends to be more costly in the long run. So we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So, basic budgeting. What are some things you need to consider? Rent or mortgage, utilities, groceries, student loan payments, obviously, cell phones, and other connectivity issues, right? Savings, insurance, gas, transportation expenses, entertainment, and one-time expenses. What are one-time expenses? What's a good example of a one-time expense? Yeah?
You have a flat tire.
You got a flat tire. The car breaks down, right? That transportation expense. That's a good example of a one-time expense. What about buying gifts for people in the holidays? That's a one-time expense. It's recurring, perhaps annually, but it's a one-time expense. It doesn't happen all the time, right? But that could also fall underneath entertainment. So there's lots of different things that you need to think about when you think about budgeting. Don't forget about savings. That flat tire you were talking about, if you're setting aside monthly payments for something like that to happen, or just to build a cushion for yourself, make sure that you do that first. Before you start paying everybody else, pay yourself. That's a really important concept to understand when it comes to budgeting. This is also related to retirement. So you can consider that savings to be maybe what you're setting aside in a 401k. If you work in education, a 403b. There's lots of different IRAs, Roth IRAs, lots of different investment vehicles that you have for retirement. Consider paying yourself first and then pay everybody else. And then what you have left over in budgeting, entertainment, one-time expenses. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so here's a very simple budget. Somebody who has $40,000 in income. So this is what it looks like on a monthly basis. About $2,300. And then here are all of the expenses that we just went through. Things like rent, utilities, groceries, one-time expenses, entertainment, transportation expenses. I'll just let you soak some of this in right now. By the way, this student loan repayment piece, that's based on the average student debt that a student graduates with at a college or university across the country. Yours may be slightly lower, slightly higher, a lot lower, a lot higher, depending on your student loan borrowing. But that's the average amount, which is about $26,000. Yeah?
So that would be if I graduate college with $26,000.
Correct. Yep. And that is a level repayment plan, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well, for a 10-year period of time. 10 years, every month, $280. Okay? Everybody ready to move on? Sobering? Okay. Know what you owe. So how do you figure this out? Like, how do I know how much I owe? One great place to stop by is the financial aid office here at UNH. We can give you all of that information. We can tell you exactly what you borrowed, what year, how much, and what your totals are. However, you also have resources available to you. Most students borrow federal student loans. Federal direct subsidized loan, federal direct unsubsidized loan. You can find that information, the National Student Loan Data System, also known as the acronym of NSLDS. You may have noticed this if any of you applied for financial aid, we are ripe with acronyms. Free application for federal student aid, FAFSA. Expected family contribution, EFC. National Student Loan Data System, NSLDS. There's all kinds of acronyms. Your FSA ID is what you need, so what you use to log into and complete your FAFSA. That's what you need to be able to take a look at. It tells you all of your federal loans. That's important to understand that it's just federal loans. There is no current marketplace option to view private or alternative education loans. So if you have a private loan, a loan outside of the federal loan programs, there's no place to go like NSLDS to find out this information. You have to simply go to your lender, whoever that may be, or however many of those you may have, because you could borrow multiple private loans from multiple lenders. So private education loans, that isn't there, but you can look at your credit report and see them there. Your credit report will also show the federal loans, but not always, while you're in school, the running balances. NSLDS will show you that information. So NSLDS for your federal loans, credit report for your private or alternative education loans. Okay? Now, who do you owe, right? So not only do you need to know how much you owe, but you need to know who you owe that to. The federal loan programs use a system called of servicers. There's about 4 or 5 of them across the country. And depending on when you borrowed may depend on where your loans are serviced. But generally, all of your loans are serviced with the same servicer. And they will hold that loan for the life of that loan. They won't upstream it anywhere else. It just stays in that one place. But what you need to know is, how do you get in contact with these folks? How do you reach out if something changes in your life circumstances? How do you make payments? How can you accelerate payments? What if you want to change your monthly payment plan? So if you set up a payment plan that's level repayment that we talked about before, $280 a month for 10 years. What if you wanted to go with graduated repayment or some other type of stepwise process where you're paying less initially and more later? How do you do that? You need to know who your servicer is. Again, NSLDS will give you that information for your federal loans. For your private or alternative loans, you just need to contact your lender. And that information may be available to you on your credit report. Most likely, if you have a private or alternative education loan, that servicer has already reached out to you and they've already contacted you and said, hey, come sign up on our website. You'll find all of that information there. Okay? So, that's what a servicer does. They service the loan, they answer your questions, they take your payments, and they keep track of how on time you are toward repaying your loans. So what about your options? So I mentioned before standard repayment. So that very first top line, standard repayment. That's what most students use when they repay their loans. Fixed monthly payment, 10-year period of time, every month, 12 months out of the year. However, there are other repayment options that are available. I mentioned graduated. That's generally paying just interest for the first 2 years, then interest plus some principal for the next 2 years, then interest plus more principal for the next 2 years. So every 2 years, there's sort of a stepwise process that you go through to start low. So we mentioned before about how you can, if you need to minimize your monthly payments at the beginning, graduated and or extended are great ways to do that. Extended simply takes the length of the loan, repayment term, and instead of having it be 10 years, it expands it out to 25. There are also options that are available that are based on your income, how much you earn. We'll talk about those in a little bit, but you can pay your student loans as a percentage of your income, rather than one of those graduated repayment or extended repayment or standard repayment terms. What does that mean? Generally means that If you start out with a lower income, you have lower monthly payments. As you earn more in your career, you're able to make higher payments. And so as your income increases, then so do your monthly payments. It's still designed to pay everything off within 10 years. And it's usually somewhere between 10 and 20% of your income that's used as that rule of thumb of how to pay off loans using an income or earning based. Loan consolidation is also an option. This is where the temptation to make everything in one place comes in, because what loan consolidation does is it pays off all of your existing student loans and creates a brand new loan with new terms, new conditions, and most importantly, a new interest rate. So the temptation to put everything in one place is obviously strong, right? However, you could lose deferment options, forbearance options, ways to postpone payments if you do something like that. You could lose more favorable interest rates. A couple of years ago, the interest rate on federal student loans was around 2 to 2.5%. Historic low. Never going to see that probably again. You don't necessarily want to consolidate a loan with that low of an interest rate. But the temptation is going to be there to put everything in one place, just because it seems like psychologically it's going to be easier to manage. It might feel easier to manage at the beginning, but it may cost you in the long run. There may be, instead of having that 2 and 2.25% interest rate, you may end up with a 5 or a 7% interest rate, depending on who you consolidate with. Okay? So again, it pays off all of your existing loans, creates a brand new loan. I also don't recommend consolidating private loans with federal loans. If you're going to consolidate all of your federal loans in one place, consolidate all of your private loans in one place, especially if you have multiple private lenders. Sometimes that actually is a good idea. But I don't recommend mixing them. And here's why. They all have different terms and conditions. And they have different ways of postponing repayment should something happen in your life later. Keep all of the benefits of the federal loans. Even through federal loan consolidation, you'll still keep those options. But if you consolidate them with a private loan, all of those go away. So I always recommend to students, loan consolidation is sort of a last resort. Like if you can't make monthly payments any other way, then consider loan consolidation. But try all of these other options first. Does that make sense? Loan consolidation, just to put everything in one place, usually doesn't work out well for the borrower. Okay, so again, here are different income-driven repayment plans. There's way too many of them to keep track. It's a big, complicated slide, but it is important because they each have their own sort of benefits and detractions, right? There are things that are good about them, things that are not so good about them. I should have had that slide up there as I was just yammering on about other stuff. So, quick note about the interest that accrues on student loans. It's known as simple daily interest. Anybody that's been in a basic economics class probably already knows this and is probably closing their eyes and snoring right now. But it's important to understand what these different terms mean. So simple is simply interest that doesn't compound. So in other words, it accrues on a daily basis until you make a payment, and then your payment goes toward whatever that accrued interest is. It doesn't get added to the principal balance that it's accruing on. Does that make sense? So you got $1,000, simple daily interest, you make a payment, it pays the outstanding interest and reduces that principal balance from $1,000 down to $990. Now interest begins accruing on the $990 on a daily basis. That's what simple means. It's very straightforward. Daily, again, it accrues every day. So, calculation quick with an interest rate of 4.6%. Interest rate divided by the number of days in the year. times your outstanding principal balance tells you how much interest accrues each day on that balance. This example is $10,000, $1.27. If it was $1,000 at 4.66%, it would be 12.7 cents, right? 0.127. So it's just moving the decimal place over 1. But this is a quick example of how you can figure out how much interest is accruing on a loan that you have. So if you've got a $2,000 loan that's accruing interest while you're in school, multiply the interest rate, or divide the interest rate by the number of days in the year, 365, and multiply that by the balance of your loan. Okay. So, when you do make a payment, what happens? This is something that fairly simple construct, but is really important for everyone to understand as well. If you have a $10,000 loan, interest rate 4.66%, we just went through this, monthly payment's going to be $104.41. The first thing that your payment is going to do is going to pay any kind of fee that you have associated with your loan. Generally, the only time you're going to have a fee on a loan is if you're paying late. Try never to pay late. There's no prepayment penalty on federal student loans, nor on private student loans. So you can pay more than the minimum amount that's required. You have to pay at least the minimum amount, however. Otherwise, you may get charged a late fee. From a federal servicer, from a private servicer, doesn't matter. Whoever's servicing the loan, if you're late on a payment, you're going to have a fee. So your payment's first going to go toward whatever those fees are. But they're not going to charge you a fee just to maintain your account. You're not going to have a fee that comes out every month. It's only if you're going to have a late payment. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Then it's going to pay the outstanding interest. So we just talked about simple daily interest. It's going to pay that simple daily interest. Then whatever is left over of your monthly payment is going to go toward the principal balance of the loan. In this example, based on, it looks like 30 days, you have $38.83 of interest that accrued on that $10,000 balance. Your $104.41 payment paid that $38.83 in interest. But that left $65.58 left, $65.58. That goes toward the principal balance of the loan. So that takes the $10,000 down to $934.42. Get the math there? So then it begins accruing interest. Then you begin accruing interest at 4.66% on the $934.42. Next payment comes in, same thing happens. As long as you're paying on time, it's never going to go toward a fee. It'll just pay that interest and then reduce your principal balance. Again, no prepayment penalties. So if you wanted to round that up to $110, you'd be paying an extra $5 of principal initially, which over time, over 12 months, $60, right? Over 3 years, $180 that you're not paying. Plus, you're reducing the amount of interest that's accruing as well because it's accruing on a lower monthly balance. You're going to pay that loan off about a year early just by paying an extra $5 a month. It sounds crazy, but it's math. It works. Okay, so then we talk about your plan. What are you going to do? How are you going to incorporate this into your life, right? Lots of different things that are out there. First, figure out what type of loans you have. What are your repayment plans that are available? Those repayment plan options that I pointed out are on your federal loans. Some private loan lenders and servicers will offer similar monthly payment plans, but not all of them do. So don't count on being able to use the same repayment plan that you have for your federal loans on a private loan that you might have. Just want to make sure that I distinguish those two. What other debt obligations do you have? We mentioned at the beginning, some of you have car payments. Some of you will have car payments. That's a debt obligation. If you buy a house, now you've got a mortgage. That's a debt obligation. And then also think about your career. Where are you headed? When are you headed there? And what are the bumps that you're inevitably going to go through, because we all do, along that path? So to define your plan, answer those questions. Those are really important questions to understand as you go forward. You don't have to have a perfect answer for each of those questions. And the answers to those questions are going to change depending on where you're at in your life. Are you 26? Are you 32? Are you 22? Those are going to change as you change and as your life changes. Okay, managing your repayment. What's the best way to do that? Well, there's no perfect way. You can have that plan, and everything's fine. And then the company you're working for has layoffs. And you're one of those. So now everything is not fine. So, what are you going to do? You have some ways of postponing repayments if things happen in your life. Deferment options tend to be big life changes, what I just said. You go through a job change, or you go through a period of unemployment. Deferments are great options for those. And those usually are available on both private loans and federal loans. Forbearance options are usually short-term. Not only did I have a flat tire, but somebody smashed into the back of my car, and now I have to get a new car. I'm going to be short this month. I don't have as much resources. Can I postpone one payment or two payments to get me through? That's what a forbearance does. Short-term, get you through a small bump. Deferments get you through bigger life bumps. Okay? And what should I do if I have a little bit extra money? What if I have some money left over in my budget, right? So we went through a budget before. You noticed that the income was about $2,300. The expenses were about $2,200. So what are you going to do with that other $90, basically? $95. You have lots of different options on what you want to do. Do you want to have an emergency fund, that savings that I mentioned before? Do you want to pay off your student loan? Do you want to pay off credit card debt? What about retirement? Are you building that into your monthly budget, thinking about 401ks and 403bs and IRAs and Roth IRAs? Do you want to put it toward a house that you own? Pay that down faster. Gain more equity in the home. What if you're planning a family? Do you want to put that aside for a child or children's college education? Those are all different things that you have to consider. Which of those do you value? Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. Your values could differ from your values, and that's perfectly fine. Just understand what you do value when you make those decisions. Okay, so I mentioned paying late. If you pay late long enough, 9 months on federal loans, generally 6 months on private education loans, you go into default. This is a very bad thing. Both from a credit perspective, because it's reported to a credit bureau, and that will affect your ability to get credit, to buy a house, to get a car loan, to get an apartment. All of those things are going to be impacted. You're probably not going to be eligible for federal student aid, so if you want to go back and get a master's degree or a doctorate degree, and you need to borrow, and you need to use federal loans for that, you're not going to be able to access that if you have defaulted on your undergraduate loans. You're going to lose eligibility for repayment plans. Collection agencies are going to show up, and they're going to charge you like crazy. There's going to be fees. And those places will actually charge you fees on a monthly basis until you get yourself out of that default status. And you can rehabilitate loans. I know it sounds like a weird thing to rehabilitate an inanimate object, but you can rehabilitate a loan. You can have your wages garnished. tax refunds can get withheld. There's all kinds of bad stuff that can happen if you default on your student loans. If you're having any trouble at all repaying your student loans, contact that servicer, because they're going to be able to help you through short bumps, long bumps, doesn't matter what's going on in your life. They're going to give you options to avoid this, because they don't want you to default either. If you default, it costs the servicers money, right? So it's in their best interest to help you. It's in your best interest to seek out that assistance. Sometimes things change in your life. Work with these folks. They'll be very helpful. So now, set yourself up for success. What are some things that you can do to make sure that you're successful, ultimately, in managing student debt? Think about those repayment plan options. You can flip in and out of those things all the time. Servicers will help you set up one type of repayment plan that fits your life in a certain point, and then as your life progresses and changes, you can always switch back, or switch out, or switch to a different one. So maybe pay as you earn is the right thing for you to do initially. But then you get to a point in your life where, hey, I just want to make the standard repayment terms. I just want to make the standard monthly payment. Go for it. Change back. Change out of that pay-as-you-earn plan. Or maybe graduated repayment makes sense initially. But then it doesn't, right? Then you feel like you have resources, you can make more monthly payments, go ahead and do that. Checkpoints, really important. You're going to change jobs. That's a reality of our life. You're going to change salary. It could go up, it could go down, it could stay the same. Usually it's going to go one of those two directions, though, either up or down. Going to have changes in your relationship status. Once you have more people in your life directly connected to you, that may change your priorities and may change those repayment plans. Change in your family size. Introducing more people. Make sure that you're evaluating this at least annually. You don't have to evaluate it every month, at least not initially. But make sure that you're sort of checking in on this. Make sure that you're taking a look at this and say, the choices that I'm making in managing my student loan debt, does that still hold for what I want to have or what I want to accomplish in my life? Does this still make sense? And probably initially, after you graduate, it's going to for the first couple of years. But as those life event things happen to you, some things might happen to make you take a step back and go, okay, this doesn't work anymore. I need to accelerate repaying this so that I can start making more of a contribution toward my retirement. Or I now have children, I want to set aside some money for their college education. So instead of being as aggressive as I was on repaying my student loans, and I've saved a bunch of interest doing that, now I want to put some of that money toward their college education. So I'm going to step back to maybe just a standard repayment term. Pay it off over time. The interest that you pay on federal student loans can be deducted on your tax return. Keep that in mind. All right, so a lot of content. Short period of time. Somebody's got to have a question. Yeah.
You mentioned that servicers are incentivized to not have you default.
Right.
But it seems to me like if I default, then it would actually be good for them because I'm paying more money. Is that not true?
No, because
what's their incentive?
yeah, so their incentive is they generally push those loans off to someplace else, to a collection agency, for instance. So they're not actually recouping all of those fees from the collection agency. Plus, they have to pay the collection agency to try to get you to repay that loan.
Okay.
So their incentive is to keep a hold of the loan, keep it in good status, and collect your payments every month. Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
My first question is just, are we going to get this slide deck?
We can certainly provide that, yeah. I can send that to Heather.
The people who attend, if there's interest in it.
Yeah, I can send that to Heather. Sure.
Sure, thanks. My other question was,
Mhm.
do you have a suggestion on like the best private loan provider? One thing that I run into is you have to like do a hard inquiry to see exactly what your interest rates would be, so I don't
Yes.
want to do that for like 5. So I was
Right.
just wondering if you have a suggestion on the best one.
It really depends. That's a tough one to answer because it really depends on what you're looking for. For some students, you're looking for the absolute lowest interest rate. And unfortunately, not every private lender uses the same credit scoring mechanism. They oftentimes have their own sort of private, behind the scenes. They won't tell anybody how they figure out what your credit score is going to, what your credit score means, and what it's going to mean, especially if you have a co-borrower. And most students need a co-borrower on a private education loan. So that's a long-winded way of saying I don't really have a recommendation on a private lender because it just depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for this lowest interest rate, that may be different for you than it is for you, right? There may be one lender that works great for you in terms of low interest rate, but you get a better interest rate with some other lender because they're valuing different things in their credit scoring and their credit interest rate calculation. Does that make sense?
So do you think that
Yeah.
it makes, like, it's worth it to get a few hard inquiries in order to find that
Yes.
one?
Absolutely, because those are temporary reductions in your credit score. Those are not permanent reductions in your credit score. Those go away in terms of their influence on your credit score over time. So it's probably better to get 3 of those hard inquiries, 4 of those hard inquiries, excuse me, within a month, and take the 20-point hit to your credit score, than it is to just go with one and hope that that was the best one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions?
I have a question for the group.
Yeah.
Did you expect it to be this involved, I guess, like so much information regarding your student loans and what repayment would look like? Yeah. Every
Yes,
time
I saw some heads go this way.
Yeah.
Saw some heads go this way. Yeah.
I mean, I've been out of college for a while now, obviously, and every time we do this, Joel, I am always struck by how valuable this information is and how I wish I had it before I graduated. Just the knowledge going into it is
Sure.
incredible.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for financial literacy for a lot of different things, right? Financial literacy extends for all kinds of different things. This is just one spoke of that wheel. Education financing. There's also all kinds of other spokes on that wheel, like retirement planning and insurance and credit scores and what those things mean. You know, the question before about this is a hard hit, right, on my credit score. Well, people who understand credit scoring know what you meant, but anybody in the room who has no idea what a hard hit means doesn't know that, oh, my credit score could go down if I just ask how much my interest rate is going to be, right? That's a thing, right? Did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I'm interested in figuring out what I'm going to be paying monthly, given what I'm planning on graduating debt-wise.
Yep.
So if I come down to the financial aid office, is there a way you guys can do a rough calculation on that?
Actually, there's some great online calculators, and the one I would recommend that you go to, if you know how much you borrowed, right? That's the key. You have to know how much you borrowed and what the interest rate is.
Yeah.
You can get that information from us. But there's an online calculator through an organization called finaid.org. So it's finaid.org. They have loan repayment calculator.
Okay.
All you need to know is your balance and your interest rate. And then you can set up and actually change the term, like how long you're going to repay it. So you can set it up for 10 years, standard repayment term. You can set it up for 15, 25. And it will give you what your monthly payment is going to be. And the entire schedule, how much you're going to pay in interest that first month, how much you're going to pay in interest assuming level repayment, right? How much you're going to pay in the 3rd year, how much you're going to pay in the 7th year, depending on which term you choose and what the interest rate is. So finaid.org is a great place. Loan repayment calculator. Just Google student loan repayment calculator. It'll probably be one of the first ones that comes up. And it's free. You don't have to sign up for anything. You're not going to get spammed with lots of email. It's just a free repayment calculator to go out and look at. Highly recommend it. But if you do need to know how much have I borrowed, what's the interest rate on these loans, you can find that at NSLDS. You can come in and find out that information from the financial aid office.
Where are you guys?
We're in the garden level of Stoke Hall. That's the basement, for those of you that wonder what the garden level means.
Garden level sounds better.
I know. That's why I say it, but it's really the basement. What other questions do you folks have? How else can we help today? Demystify some of this information.
I just have a comment that one of the things that really surprised me when I graduated and you become an adult in the real world with all of these different bills that you never had to pay before, I never realized how much interest there was in basically everything that you are buying, from a car to a house to student loans, and even like car insurance, right? Like cheaper to pay the lump sum right up front versus on the monthly schedule. And you breaking down this, like the zero for fee, this amount for the interest and this for the regular payment, and so much goes to the interest. So, the total you spend for interest by the end of it,
Right.
Right,
and that's important to understand, especially in the context of student loans, because if you go with lower monthly payments, that means most, if not all, of your payment each month is going to pay the interest. You're going to have very little of that principal balance reduction. The less you have in a principal balance reduction, the more interest you pay over time, because you're not actually lowering your interest every month, right? What you want to do is try to do that if you can. But sometimes, based on what you earn and what your life circumstances are, that low monthly payment is exactly what you need to do. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's the right thing to do for you in that situation. So don't look at it and say, I have to avoid that at all cost, because it may be exactly what you need at a specific point in your life. Okay? All right, anything else? We good? What do you think,
Thank you,
Heather?
Joel.
All right. Thank you all. Great questions.